The kingdom of Dracoria was a place of beauty, peace, and harmony. Its people were known for their deep connection with the stars and the peaceful existence they maintained under the guidance of their queen. The planet, rich with history and culture, thrived on the relationships it had built with neighboring systems. Among the many who called Dracoria home, one stood out above all: the queen's daughter, Princess Lyra. She was the future of the kingdom, loved and admired by everyone. But peace was fragile. The stars that once symbolized safety had turned into a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the vastness of space. The Dracorian kingdom was under threat. A deadly alien faction from a far-off galaxy had set their sights on the riches of Dracoria. Led by a ruthless warlord, they had launched an attack on the royal palace, seeking to capture Princess Lyra and claim the kingdom as their own. They wanted her, the future heir, as leverage. The queen's advisors were frantic, trying to come up with a plan to save her, but the enemy was powerful and quick. In the midst of this crisis, there was one name that echoed in the palace hallways, a name that had been forgotten by many, but one that still held power. Arik, once a guardian in the queen's elite guard, he had long since stepped away from the role, preferring to live a quiet life. His past was filled with honor, strength, and unwavering loyalty to the royal family. But time had taken its toll, and Arik had been overlooked. He was no longer the young, sharp protector he had once been. Now he was a simple man, living on the outskirts of the kingdom. But when the news reached him, the princess had been captured, something in Arik stirred. He couldn't ignore it. The fire of duty, the bond he once shared with the royal family, ignited once more. The moment he heard that Princess Lyra had been taken, Arik knew what he had to do. He was the only one who knew the secret passages of the palace, the hidden paths through the jungle that led to the distant corners of Dracoria. He was the only one who could move unnoticed through enemy lines. It was his chance to return to his old life, to be the protector once more. Arik set out at once, without hesitation. The journey was long and treacherous, and he had no illusions about the danger that awaited him. He had seen the alien invaders firsthand. They were unlike any enemy he had faced before. Their technology was far beyond anything Dracoria had ever known, and their forces were overwhelming. But Arik had something they did not. He had knowledge of the land, the secrets of Dracoria, and above all, the will to fight for what was right. As he trekked through the dense forest that surrounded the kingdom, Arik reflected on his past. He had been a guardian once, a protector of the people, but now he was just a man with regrets and scars from a time long gone. But Lyra had always been different. She had reminded him of why he had chosen to serve the royal family in the first place. Her innocence, her compassion, it had all been so pure. He had watched her grow from a curious child into a strong, intelligent young woman. She was not just the queen's daughter. She was the hope of Dracoria, the future, and he would not let the future fall into enemy hands. Arik's path took him to the edge of the kingdom, to the mountains that bordered Dracoria. The journey was not just a physical challenge, it was a mental one as well. Every step he took brought him closer to the enemy, and every moment was a reminder of what was at stake. He thought of Lyra, her face bright and full of life in his memory. He could not let her fall into the hands of the invaders. He would not allow it. As Arik reached the mountain pass, he encountered his first obstacle, a group of alien soldiers patrolling the area. They were heavily armed, their advanced weaponry gleaming in the dim light of the distant stars. Arik knew he had to act quickly. He had trained for moments like this, and the skills he had honed during his time as a guardian came rushing back to him. He moved silently through the shadows, avoiding detection. His movements were calculated, precise, and his heart raced with the adrenaline of the hunt. It wasn't long before Arik found himself within striking distance of the soldiers. He had to be swift. One wrong move could mean the end of everything. With a swift motion, he disarmed one of the soldiers and quickly subdued him, using his own weapon against him. The others had no time to react before Arik was on them, his speed and strength overwhelming their defenses. Within moments, The soldiers were incapacitated, lying unconscious in the snow. But Eric didn't have time to rest. He needed to move forward. The path ahead was still long, and the enemy was growing more dangerous with each passing hour. He knew he had to reach Elara before the invaders moved her to their main base. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the kingdom rested on his shoulders. The night grew colder as Eric pressed on, moving deeper into enemy territory. He had no illusions about what was to come. He knew that the true test of his abilities had yet to come. But for now, all that mattered was reaching Princess Elara and bringing her home. As he navigated through the thick, alien landscape, Eric felt a sense of determination settle over him. He wasn't just fighting for the princess anymore. He was fighting for Dracoria, for the future of the people he had sworn to protect. This mission was his chance to make things right, to show that even the forgotten guardian could rise to the occasion. He would fight to the end, no matter the cost. And in the far distance, unseen by Arike, Princess Elara was not sitting idle. Her captivity had forced her into a corner, but she had never been one to give up easily. Though she was surrounded by the enemy, she could still feel the strength inside her growing. She had inherited the queen's resolve, and she would use it to her advantage. The story was only beginning, and neither Eric nor Elara knew just how their fates would intertwine in the coming days. The future of Dracoria was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Eric was going to save her, no matter what. The journey had been long, and the enemy's forces were everywhere. The closer Eric got to the alien stronghold, the more dangerous his path became. The soldiers, their armor gleaming under the cold moonlight, were only a part of the challenge. The terrain itself seemed to conspire against him. Thick, alien vegetation covered the ground, its sharp thorns reaching out like the claws of some hidden predator. Every step was a risk, every noise a potential threat. But Eric had faced danger before, and it had never stopped him. As he moved through the dense forest, Eric couldn't help but think of Elara. He had been a protector once, a guardian who swore to keep her safe. It was a vow he had taken seriously. The queen had trusted him with her daughter's life, and now that trust was on his shoulders again. His mind raced as he thought of her, strong, wise, but still so young. The princess was not a child anymore, but she had never faced anything like this, alone in the hands of the enemy. Eric feared for her safety. He knew she would be strong. Elara was more than the princess people saw. She had inherited the queen's sharp mind, the same unyielding will that had carried Dracoria through countless challenges. But even the strongest could break, and Eric wasn't willing to let her do that, not while he still had the strength to fight for her. The further he ventured into enemy territory, the more Eric felt the weight of his mission. The landscape was alien, unfamiliar. The plants and animals were unlike anything he had seen in Dracoria. Some of the creatures that roamed these lands were even larger than the beasts found in the kingdom's wilds. Eric had heard stories of how dangerous the aliens were, stories that didn't do justice to the true terror these invaders brought with them. Night had fallen fully now, and the cold was biting, the wind howling through the trees like some ghostly cry. But Eric's determination kept him going. He had learned long ago that the cold and the dark were nothing more than distractions. What mattered was his goal, to reach Elara, to bring her home. As he approached a ridge, he stopped to survey the area. Below him, in the distance, was the alien base, a sprawling structure covered in sharp, jagged metal that reflected the light of the twin moons above. Eric couldn't see much from here, but he could feel the presence of the enemy, a heavy weight that pressed down on him like a predator stalking its prey. He knew the base would be well guarded, that the soldiers would be looking for any sign of intrusion, but he had no choice. He had to get inside. The plan had been simple. Sneak past the outer defenses, find Elara, and get her out before the enemy could react. But as Eric continued to watch the base from his vantage point, he realized how much more difficult this mission was going to be than he had anticipated. There were too many guards, too many eyes watching every corner, and the alien technology they wielded was something he hadn't counted on. They had scanners, weapons, and shields that he could not hope to match. Eric needed to be smarter than they were. He had to use what he knew. His knowledge of the land, the secret routes he had traveled years ago, and his own instincts. Eric waited, watching for any sign of movement. Hours passed before he saw his chance. A group of soldiers walked along a narrow path that led to the base's eastern entrance. The path was dimly lit by flickering lights, and the soldiers seemed tired, their steps heavy as they walked, unaware of the danger around them. Eric took a deep breath. His heart was steady, his mind clear. He moved quickly, slipping into the shadows and silently following the group. He knew this area well. The path they were taking was one he had used in his past when moving through Dracorius forests. He knew where the rocks were loose, where the trees could provide cover. He had the advantage of knowledge. The soldiers were unaware of Eric's presence. He crept along behind them, using the cover of the terrain to stay out of sight. As they turned a corner, Eric took his chance. He leapt forward, catching the last soldier off guard. With a swift, practiced motion, Eric knocked the soldier unconscious and dragged his body into the shadows. The others had not heard a thing, but the risk was growing. The closer he got to the base, the more dangerous the mission became. He had taken out one soldier, but he couldn't afford to fight them all. Stealth was his only option. As he approached the base's outer wall, Eric found an old tunnel entrance, hidden beneath the roots of a massive tree. It was narrow, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through, but it led directly into the base's underground storage area. The entrance had been sealed off long ago, and no one would have expected him to use it. This was his way in. Eric descended into the darkness, moving cautiously, his hands brushing against the cool walls of the tunnel. It was damp, the air thick with the scent of earth and moss. He could hear the faint sound of movement in the distance, the hum of machines, and the occasional clink of metal. The base was alive, a network of activity that hummed with tension. When he reached the end of the tunnel, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. It was filled with crates, weapons, and supplies, things he would need to get Lyra out. Eric took a moment to catch his breath before moving forward. He knew he had to act quickly. Time was running out. Up ahead, the sound of voices grew louder. Eric paused, listening. It sounded like guards were coming his way. He couldn't afford to be discovered. Not now, not when he was so close. He needed to find Lyra, to get her out before the enemy knew he was there. Eric crept toward the door, pressing his back against the cool metal wall. He had to remain unseen, to blend into the shadows. As the guards passed by, he held his breath, praying they wouldn't notice him. When they were out of earshot, he moved quickly, slipping into the hallway. The halls of the base were quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of machinery. Eric moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows, listening for any signs of danger. He didn't know where Lyra was, but he had a feeling. The energy in the air was different here, more tense, more dangerous. He could feel it in his bones. She was close. Minutes later, Eric arrived at a large door, guarded by 2 soldiers. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the insignia above the door, the royal seal. It was the room where Lyra was being held. With no time to waste, Eric moved into action. He lunged at the guards, catching them off guard. His body moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent years perfecting his skills. Within moments, the guards were on the floor, unconscious and unable to raise the alarm. Eric stepped into the room. It was dimly lit, but the light revealed everything he needed to see. There, in the center of the room, was Lyra. She was kneeling on the floor, her hands bound, her expression tired but determined. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was no need to. They both knew what needed to be done. "Lyra!" Eric whispered, his voice filled with relief. "We're getting out of here." She nodded, her eyes brightening with hope. "I knew you would come." Eric's heart raced as he helped Lyra to her feet. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in around them. But the princess's presence made everything seem possible. They were so close, so close to freedom. Yet there were still many dangers ahead. The guards outside had to be dealt with, and the alien base was still teeming with enemies. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. "Stay close," Eric whispered, his voice low. "We need to move quickly."
"If we get caught—" "I know," Lyra interrupted, her voice firm. "I won't slow you down." Eric gave her a brief nod of approval before leading the way.
They moved quickly through the dark hallways of the alien base, staying to the shadows, avoiding detection. The sound of their footsteps was muffled by the thick metal floors, but every time a door opened or a guard passed by, their hearts seemed to beat louder in their chests. Eric's instincts, honed over years of training, kept him sharp. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. As they turned a corner, Eric froze. A guard was standing just ahead, blocking their path. The soldier was tall and imposing, his weapon slung over his shoulder. Eric's hand went to the hilt of his knife, but before he could make a move, Lyra reached out and stopped him.
"Let me handle this," she said quietly, her voice steady. Eric raised an eyebrow, surprised.
"Are you sure?" Lyra nodded. "I've been trained for this. Dirty." "I can do it." For a moment, Eric hesitated, then stepped back to give her space. He didn't know how much training the princess had received, but if she said she could handle it, he would trust her. She was more than just a princess. She'd proven herself to be a capable leader and a fierce individual. Lyra moved forward with purpose, her steps silent as she approached the guard. She kept her eyes locked on him, never wavering. The guard noticed her too late. In one smooth motion, Lyra reached up and grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisting it with precision. The guard grunted in pain, but before he could react, Lyra delivered a sharp blow to the back of his neck, knocking him out cold. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious.
Eric stared in disbelief. "Impressive," he muttered, his respect for her growing.
"Thanks," Lyra replied, a faint smile on her face. "Let's keep moving." They continued their trek through the base, each step bringing them closer to the exit. The further they went, the more Eric could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. He had expected resistance, but the silence of the base was eerie. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the aliens were waiting for them to make a mistake. As they neared the main entrance, they found themselves standing in front of a large steel door. It was thick and reinforced, but Eric knew the layout of the base well enough to know it was their only way out. The problem was that it was guarded by more soldiers. The sounds of their conversations could be heard from the other side, but the door was too solid to peer through. "How do we get through this?" Lyra asked, her voice tense.
Eric thought for a moment. "We'll have to fight our way through," he said. "But we need to be quick. If we make too much noise, we'll have the entire base on our backs." Lyra nodded, her expression serious.
She had proven herself already, and now it was time for them to work together. Arik reached into his belt and pulled out a small, handheld device. It was a gadget he had used in his time as a guardian, a device designed to disable security systems. He quickly attached it to the door's control panel, praying it would work. The beeping of the device echoed in the silence as it worked its magic. A few tense seconds passed before the device emitted a soft click, signaling the door was now unlocked. "We're in," Eric said quietly. They slipped through the door and into a narrow corridor that led outside. The cool night air hit them like a wave, and for the first time since they had entered the base, Eric allowed himself to take a deep breath. They were out of the building, but they still weren't safe. The surrounding area was teeming with alien soldiers, and the journey back to the kingdom would be long and dangerous. But they had to keep moving. Lyra glanced around, her eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. "We can't just walk out in the open," she said. "They'll see us." "Right," Eric agreed. "There's a forest not far from here. We'll use that for cover. It's our best chance." They moved swiftly through the dark, the trees providing a much-needed shield from the enemy's view. The forest was thick with alien vegetation, but Eric knew how to navigate it. The foliage made it difficult to see, but it also offered protection. The thick canopy overhead allowed just enough light to see where they were going, and the sounds of the forest helped mask their movements. As they pushed forward, Eric kept an eye on Lyra. She was doing well, staying close and following his lead. He could see the determination in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a sense of vulnerability that she was trying to hide. She had been through so much already, and it wasn't over yet. Eric couldn't help but feel a protectiveness toward her, a need to keep her safe at all costs. After what felt like hours of moving through the dense forest, they finally came to a clearing. In the distance, they could see the edge of the kingdom's border, just beyond the tree line. Eric's heart leapt in his chest. Freedom was so close, but there was still one final obstacle. The alien soldiers would be searching for them, and they would be relentless. They had to get through the clearing without being spotted. Eric crouched down beside Lyra, his voice low.
"We make a run for it," he said. "Stay low and keep moving."
"Don't stop until we're out of their range." Lyra nodded, her eyes steady. "Let's go!" The two of them sprinted across the clearing, the tall grass brushing against their legs as they ran. Eric's heart was pounding in his chest, but he kept his focus. The soldiers were closing in, but they couldn't afford to slow down. Every step brought them closer to safety. Just as they reached the edge of the clearing, a bright light flashed in the distance. Eric turned to look, his stomach sinking as he saw the alien soldiers emerging from the trees. They had been spotted. The chase had begun. But Eric was ready. He had no choice but to fight, and he wouldn't let them take Lyra. Not now, not after everything they had been through. Eric and Lyra had barely made it to the edge of the clearing when the sound of approaching footsteps reached their ears. The alien soldiers were closing in, and they were fast. Eric's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't hesitate. They had come this far. They couldn't stop now. "Keep running," he whispered urgently to Lyra. "Don't look back." She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. The two of them sprinted through the thick grass, dodging trees and low branches that reached out like the hands of the forest itself. The cold night air stung their faces as they ran, but they had no time to slow down. Behind them, the sound of the alien soldiers grew louder, the crunch of their heavy boots in the underbrush echoing through the night.
Eric's mind raced. He needed a plan.
They couldn't outrun the soldiers forever. The base was still too close and there were too many of them. He needed to lead them to safety, to the place where they could finally rest. But the forest was vast, and he had no idea how far the soldiers were willing to chase them. "We have to find cover," Eric muttered, looking around for any possible place to hide. He spotted a small cave in the distance, half hidden behind a cluster of boulders. It was their best chance. They wouldn't be able to outrun the soldiers for much longer, but if they could get into the cave, they might have a chance to regroup. "Over there," Eric said, pointing toward the cave. "Come on, hurry!" The two of them pushed forward, the soldiers' pursuit growing louder with each passing second. Eric could hear their voices now, their alien language carrying on the wind. He knew they were closing in on them, and if they didn't make it to the cave in time, they would be caught. But just as they reached the cave's entrance, a shot rang out from behind them. Eric's heart skipped a beat, and he spun around just in time to see one of the soldiers aiming his weapon directly at them. Without thinking, Eric threw himself in front of Lyra, taking the shot intended for her. The world seemed to freeze as the impact knocked the wind out of him. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it was nothing compared to the fear he felt when he saw Lyra's terrified face. He couldn't let her see him hurt. Not now. Not when they were so close to safety. "Eric!" Lyra screamed, her voice filled with panic. She rushed to his side, helping him to the ground. "Stay with me, please." "I'm fine," Eric grunted, trying to push himself up. "We have to." Another shot rang out, and Eric felt a surge of adrenaline. The soldiers were closing in. He had to get Lyra to safety no matter what. With all his strength, he managed to pull himself to his feet, his arm around Lyra's waist to support her. "Come on!" Arik said through gritted teeth, his voice strained but determined. "We're not done yet." They stumbled into the cave, their movements slow but desperate. Once inside, Eric collapsed against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could feel the blood seeping from the wound in his side. But he pushed the pain aside. There was no time to rest. Alara knelt beside him, her hands shaking as she tried to help him. But Eric gently pushed her away.
"We need to stay quiet," he whispered. "They'll be looking for us."
If they find us here," he didn't finish the sentence. Alara understood.
They were hiding, but only for a short time. They couldn't stay in the cave forever. "We need a plan," Eric said, his mind racing. The cave was small, and it wouldn't take the soldiers long to search it. They needed to get out. But how? He knew they couldn't just walk away from this. The alien soldiers had their weapons, their technology, and they wouldn't stop until they had Alara back in their hands. For a moment, the weight of it all hit him. They had come so far. So much had happened already. Too much. He could feel the pain from his wound growing more intense, but he couldn't let it stop him. He had to protect Alara. That was his only focus. "We'll make it," he said, looking at her with determination. "I won't let them take you." Alara nodded, her face set with resolve. "I trust you, Eric." The words filled him with a sense of strength. He couldn't fail her now, not when she had put so much trust in him. He had to keep fighting, for both of them. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the soldiers outside. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind seemed to make their hearts race. But eventually, the sounds of the soldiers faded. Whether they had moved on or were simply waiting, Arik couldn't tell. But the silence gave him a small window of opportunity. "We can't stay here," Eric said finally, pushing himself to his feet again. His wound was still bleeding, but he refused to let it slow him down. He had to keep going. He helped Alara up, and the two of them moved quietly through the cave, keeping to the shadows. They didn't speak as they made their way deeper into the darkness. Eric knew the only way to survive this was to stay focused, to stay one step ahead of the soldiers who were hunting them. As they reached the back of the cave, Eric saw a narrow opening. It led outside, to a small cliffside that overlooked the valley below. The ground was uneven, but it was the only way out. "We'll go down this way," Eric said, motioning toward the opening. "It's the fastest way to get out of their reach." Alara nodded, her eyes still wide with worry. She had seen what Eric was capable of, but she could see that he was growing weaker by the minute. His strength was fading, and the wound in his side was clearly taking its toll. But Eric wasn't about to let that stop him. With one last look at the cave, the two of them stepped out into the open. The night air hit them again, sharp and cold. Below them, the valley stretched out, a mix of alien landscapes and natural beauty. They had to make it down. One wrong move, and they would be caught. Eric led the way, his steps careful but quick. Alara followed closely behind, watching him as he moved with the same determination that had brought them this far. She knew the danger they faced, but she trusted Eric completely. If he could keep them safe this long, she believed he could get them to the kingdom. The climb down the cliffside was difficult, but they made it. Once they reached the bottom, they quickly moved into the trees, hoping that cover would keep them hidden. But as they made their way deeper into the forest, Eric felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it. For now, they were safe.
"We'll make it back to Dracaria," Eric said, his voice steady. "I promised you I'd get you home."
"And I will." Alara smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I believe you." And for the first time since their journey had begun, Eric allowed himself to believe it too. They were not done yet, but they were closer than they had ever been. They had fought together, survived together, and now they would return home together, no matter what it took.